My next guest on the program here in the studio, Bridget McKenzie, the Agriculture Minister. Thanks very much for your time.
Great to be with you, Tom.
So we're learning this week some of the numbers again from this bushfire crisis. 19,000 farmers, foresters and fishers hard hit is how it's described. What does that mean? That basically the business or something is in pretty bad shape and they'll need months to rebuild at least? Well,
as we know, our farmers are at the front line of this bushfire crisis. Many of them are the first responders. They're either a member of their local RFS brigade, their CFA, etc. And some in the northern New South Wales area have been struggling with the impact of bushfire since October. When we assess the area of the bushfire up until today's date, it does encompass 19,000 farming, fishing or forestry enterprises.
In some way, that could be slightly hit or raised.
So if I was in the Adelaide Hills, for instance, this week, and looking at who was hit and how hard, you really saw the nature of the bushfire itself can be indiscriminate in who it chooses to burn out, and then the neighbouring property doesn't even have a blade of grass, burnt. And so I think as state teams are getting on the ground, assessing property by property, the livestock losses, the damage to vines, for instance, when it comes to wineries, or indeed orchards, that's when we're getting the numbers back. And as you say, they're climbing quite steeply as those teams get on the ground.
Yeah, as the assessment teams are there. I was surprised to hear a third of the vines in the Adelaide Hills. I guess so many other stories that it's not being forgotten about.
And some of those, Tom, I think, we see the carcasses on our beef and sheep, horrific numbers out of Kangaroo Island. That's sort of a very visual reminder of the intensity of these fires. But the vascular damage to our horticultural industry won't be determined for many, many months. So it's going to take years to recover for this.
So the grants announced yesterday, $75,000. Who's eligible for these payments? How does that work briefly?
Yeah, so it's been great to deliver that immediate assistance. As I've travelled around, farmers are wanting to get access back on their property, number one, to assess the damage. So the ADF's been fantastic in actually getting the kill trees down so they can get back on property. They're wanting fodder and water as a precedent, help with disposing of deceased livestock, and now getting the fencing task back on. And they're coming home, they're assessing the damage. They might need an excavator for a couple of days. They might need the solar panels back on the water bore to get fresh water back onto the property, etc. They're needing this work done immediately so that they can actually get the farm back into productive capacity. So up to $75,000.
So would they fill it out and they say, look, I need an excavator and these 3 fences. How does that intersect as well with insurance, what they're insured for versus what they get out of this grant?
So as we announced yesterday, this is under Category D funding under our disaster recovery arrangements with states. So we've got the money on the table. We've been in discussions with the state since yesterday around how quickly we can get this out, the eligibility and guidelines. So it's a very simple process. We don't want people having to come in and say, I need help, here's 80 pages to fill out. And we're really using as a template the disaster recovery response that we saw in the North Queensland floods. It was very quick, got the money on the ground for farmers to actually get that essential work done. So the guidelines are you have to be a primary producer.
Right.
This isn't something that will be available for hobby farmers per se, but you have your primary means of production needs to be as a farmer. You don't necessarily need to have lost your house. I was on properties last week, Bega dairy suppliers who'd their entire property had been burnt out, their heifer herd, which is their next 2 years of milking cattle, dead, the house and the hay shed, all tickety-boo, and they were the insured pieces. So just because your house is standing doesn't mean your business isn't going to be...
Can you insure the heifer cows? I mean, there'd be some sort of insurance you can take out.
Well, you can, but it comes down to the cost, then becomes quite prohibitive as well. It's the same with multi-peril crop insurance, etc., for the cropping guys. So
is there an under-insurance aspect here?
Well, I think there's a raft of issues for individual farmers, and that'll differ as we get through this crisis. Tomorrow I've got the Agricultural Roundtable. I've got primary producer bodies from across Australia coming to meet with me to talk about the recovery phase. And as I said, the pinch points for different commodities are going to be different. So what's good for the wine industry is not going to be necessarily what the cattle industry needs. So we as a government need to be across what each individual industry needs so that we can help them get back on their feet as quickly as possible.
I want to take an example. You've been to Batlow.
Yep.
Really hard hit. So apple orchards, I think they're nearly all gone. Pine plantations in a similar situation. It's most of the town's income and jobs as well. And they're talking about 15 years plus to get back to the levels they were at, the maturity of the various plantations. How do they survive until then?
Well, I think, Tom, when I was on the ground in Batlow meeting with orchardists, they were talking about a loss of 10 to 15% locally. They need to wait till spring to actually ascertain the damage to the trees. Some will be more damaged than others, obviously. So the netting piece needs to be re-established, and do they need to get the infrastructure to not just plant the trees but all the support structures for an orchard. Their estimates were $150,000 per hectare to fully replace the existing orchards. So I think, again, it goes to the sporadic nature of how Batlow was hit. They're up for replanting, staying where they are, still producing apples, still running the cider festival, I think, is in May.
Okay.
And so, you know, all your viewers should be supporting these communities by visiting and purchasing products as much as they can. Yeah, which in some cases can start right now. We have to leave it there. We've got to get to a news conference with Bridget McKenzie. Thanks for your time. Thanks.